On the day Marianne Faithfull passed away, the lights in her small apartment were still on, but inside, everything was silent, as if time had stopped long ago. No reporters waited at the door, no rows of flowers for farewell. Only a few old friends knew the news, and they said, "It feels like she left this world years ago." It's hard to believe that this was the ending for a woman who once shook Britain to its core. From the muse of the Rolling Stones, her voice filling the radio airwaves, to the image of a blonde young woman standing in the middle of a scandal storm, Marianne's life was a tapestry of dazzling highs and plunges into the deepest lows. And even in her final years, when it seemed she had finally found peace, there were still shadows she never spoke of. The door has now closed, but behind it lies a story the world thought it knew, yet never truly understood. Chapter 1. From a fateful party to the scandal that shook Britain. One winter night in 1967, what seemed like nothing more than a friendly gathering turned into something that would change Redlands forever. Outside Keith Richards' country home in Sussex, the cold wind whipped through the trees. Inside, the Rolling Stones' circle of friends sank deeper into music, wine, and half-serious conversation. No one imagined that in just minutes, that warmth would be ripped apart. A pounding knock at the door. Flashlights cutting through the rooms. Police pouring in, led by an officer who had long kept the Stones in his sights. In the glare of the lights and the heavy thud of boots on the floor, Marianne descended the staircase, not in a dress, but wrapped only in a white fur rug. That image was never fully captured on film, yet the story outside exploded. The tabloids competed to embellish it, adding a sordid detail about a piece of chocolate. Years later, Marianne would call it the diseased fantasy of a dirty old man. But at the time, the lie took on a life of its own, an urban myth that refused to die. The press didn't just report, they judged. In their eyes, Marianne was no longer the 17-year-old who once sang As Tears Go By. She became a symbol of moral decline that a conservative Britain was eager to punish. A friend recalled, "After that night, every professional door narrowed. She wasn't seen as an artist anymore, but as a scandal in human form. The trial became a public spectacle, with the Rolling Stones held up as an example. But in the eye of the storm, it was Marianne whose face appeared most often on the front pages. While the men of the band went on recording and performing, her career was virtually frozen. All eyes were on her, as if every sin of that Redlands night had been stitched into that white fur. In the days that followed, she still turned up at a few parties, a few shows, but the way people looked at her had changed. One acquaintance recalled how she began leaving a room the moment a camera was aimed in her direction. The smile that once greeted the flashbulbs was gone. In a single night, everything had shifted. It didn't just strip away the image of the blonde angel, it opened a new chapter in her life, one of prejudice, suspicion, and whispers that never faded. Yet the bigger question still lingers. Was Redlands truly nothing more than a routine drug raid? Or was it a carefully staged witch hunt, with Marianne Faithfull, willingly or not, placed right at its center? Chapter 2. From privileged young lady to the deepest humiliation of her life. Before she became the girl in the fur rug at Redlands, Marianne Faithfull had grown up between two very different worlds. She was born in Hampstead, London, in December of 1946. Her father, Glyn Faithfull, was a British intelligence officer who had served in the Second World War. Her mother, Eva von Sacher-Masoch, was an Austrian baroness who had once danced in the company of celebrated theater director Max Reinhardt. On paper, it was an aristocratic background. In reality, the family was far from wealthy. Her parents separated when she was young, and she lived with her mother in rented flats, sometimes relying on the kindness of friends. Part of her childhood was spent at Brazier's Park, an experimental community of intellectuals and artists who believed in equality and shared living. From the age of 7, Marianne was sent to St. Joseph's Convent School. Strict discipline, neat uniforms, long masses in the chapel. She would later say it was a place that taught her discipline, but also left her with a sense of constraint and loneliness. "I learned to hide my feelings from a very early age, she recalled. As a teenager, Marianne began to find her escape through music. She listened to Joan Baez and Bob Dylan, learned a few guitar chords from friends, and sang in small coffee houses around London. Classmates remembered a clear, slightly melancholy voice, and a way of standing on stage that made her seem apart from the crowd. Though she had a background touched by nobility, Marianne never felt at home in formal parties or the circles of high society. She was drawn instead to gatherings of artists, to cramped flats thick with music and cigarette smoke, places where she felt freer than anywhere else. A friend from those years remembered, Marianne was always caught between two worlds. She could wear a ball gown like a princess, but she could also sit cross-legged on the floor, singing folk songs with an old guitar. And she always seemed to be searching for something. In the spring of 1964, at just 17, Marianne attended a Rolling Stones launch party. Andrew Loog Oldham, the group's manager, spotted her and instantly saw a vision. A blonde-haired girl with an innocent voice, just wild enough to fit into swinging London. Only weeks later, she recorded As Tears Go By, written by Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, and Oldham himself. The song quickly climbed the charts, and Marianne stepped into the public eye. But the spotlight also revealed new cracks. Some in the industry believed Oldham saw in Marianne more than a singer, a visual icon who could sell magazines. She was praised for her talent, yet boxed into the role of an ingenue, designed for the press. By 18, Marianne was both the girl singing folk tunes in small clubs and the face-gracing magazine covers, stepping into parties where cameras were always waiting. And between those two worlds, she began her first steps toward the people and events that would lead directly to Redlands. But what in her childhood, and in those early years, made her so vulnerable to the pull of fame and scandal? And were the cracks formed back then the reason she could never fully escape the shadows that followed? Chapter 3. From the Rolling Stones muse to the outsider. When Marianne Faithfull met Mick Jagger in 1966, she was already a familiar face in London. They crossed paths often, at parties, in recording studios, and were quickly drawn to each other. She once described Mick as a man bursting with creative energy, dangerous and magnetic all at once. In the beginning, their love felt like something out of a dream. They listened to music together, read books, and shared daring ideas. It was Marianne who introduced Mick to the Russian novel, The Master and Margarita, a work that would later help inspire the lyrics to Sympathy for the Devil. She was more than a muse. She was a collaborator. The haunting song, Sister Morphine, with its stark images of addiction and death's shadow, came directly from her own pen and lived experience. But behind the camera flashes was another reality. Fame put an almost immediate strain on their relationship. A relentless schedule, the press at their heels, and a carousel of endless parties. Marianne began to feel confined to the role of Mick Jagger's girlfriend. She stood beside him at events, but behind the scenes, the gap between the Stones world and her own life became impossible to ignore. One friend recalled, sometimes Mick would disappear for days and come back as if nothing had happened. She would wait, or find ways to fill the emptiness. That absence carved an emotional hollow that even celebrity could not fill. In 1969, Marianne became pregnant, but lost the baby. The loss left a wound that never fully healed. Around the same time, her relationship with her young son Nicholas, from her marriage to John Dunbar, grew distant. Eventually, the court awarded John full custody, citing Marianne's unstable living conditions. She would later say, "I lost the baby I never got to hold, and then I lost the only child I had left." From then on, her smile for the cameras became forced. The newspapers still called them the golden couple of swinging London. But at home, silence had replaced laughter. Someone in their circle recalled a little-known story. Mick once gave Marianne a ring, hinting at marriage. But the wedding never happened. Even in their most intimate moments, there was a distance they could never bridge. By 1970, the relationship was over. For Marianne, it wasn't just the end of an affair. It was an exit from an entire world that had consumed her youth. She walked away carrying deep scars and a void she didn't yet know how to fill. That love had lifted her to the height of fame, but also opened the door to the darkest years of her life. Perhaps, from the very beginning, she sensed she would lose more than she gained. And perhaps everything that followed, the years lived on the edge between life and death, began right here. Chapter 4. Music as salvation, but never enough to save herself. July 1969, a gray morning in Sydney. Marianne Faithfull was found unconscious on the floor of her hotel room. Beside her, an empty bottle of sleeping pills and a half-finished glass of wine. No one knew how long she had been there. The official statement called it a nervous breakdown. But those present whispered another possibility, that she had tried to leave this world. She was rushed to the hospital in a deep coma. 6 days later, she opened her eyes. Her first words to the nurse were, "I didn't make it." From her bed, she could see the flash of cameras outside the hospital gates. The press had already found her. They called her the tragic beauty, as if suffering itself had become part of her public image. A friend remembered, it was like she was standing between two worlds, one bathed in stage lights, the other, a darkness she couldn't quite step away from. By then, her relationship with Mick Jagger was badly fractured. The loss of her unborn child still weighed heavily, and custody of Nicholas was no longer hers. But there was another strange detail. A few days before the incident, Marianne had sent a short letter to a friend in London. It read simply, "I'm afraid I won't make it through the summer." There was no explanation, no mention of illness, no hint of a specific threat. Only a quiet warning, and then silence. Someone from the touring crew claimed that on the night before she was found, she went out alone. No one knew where. When she returned, her eyes were red and her coat smelled strongly of cigarette smoke, not the brand she usually smoked. This was never explained. In the weeks after, Marianne still appeared at a few public events with Mick, but her smile had changed. She was thinner, her gaze unfocused, as if she had lost her anchor. Those 6 days were more than just the time between life and death. They were a door to a new existence, one that felt unstable, like living as the shadow of herself. Was this the moment when everything truly broke, or was it only a warning bell, one that neither Marianne nor anyone around her chose to hear? Chapter 5. The Missing Years and a Life Like a Ghost. The 1970s passed without anyone truly knowing where Marianne was. No more stages, no more glossy photographs, only scattered stories from those who claimed to have crossed her path by chance. Someone swore they saw her sitting alone in a shabby cafe in Soho, staring out at the rain with nothing but a cup of cold tea in front of her. Another insisted they had met her at a gas station on the outskirts of town, wearing a torn coat, hair tangled, almost unrecognizable as the woman who had once been an icon of swinging London. She lived in short-term rentals, moving constantly. Sometimes she would vanish for months, leaving nothing behind but an unpaid room bill. A journalist once tried to track her down, but all he got from a landlord was, "She's gone, didn't say where," left a blank notebook. Years of addiction, paired with fragile, fleeting relationships, turned Marianne into a name few in the music industry dared to mention. For many, she had already died in the public's mind. The official announcement just hadn't come yet. An old musician friend once sighed, "The scariest thing is being alive while the whole world thinks you've disappeared." Yet there were details that didn't add up. A friend in Paris said that from time to time, she would receive letters from Marianne. No return address, just a few handwritten lines, as if from some faraway place. In one, Marianne wrote, "I'm still here, but I don't belong here anymore." No one knew whether here meant a physical location or a state of mind. In 1975, rumors placed her in Ireland, living among a small group of unknown artists. But by the time a photographer arrived, she was already gone. No pictures, no interviews, just a nearly decade-long blur in her life story, as though those years had been deliberately erased. Was Marianne hiding from something? Or was this the only way she could hold on to a part of herself after everything else had been taken? Chapter 6. Back on stage, with a fear that never left. When Marianne reappeared in the early 1980s, many could hardly believe she was the same woman who had once set London ablaze. Her face was gaunt, her voice rasped, and her eyes looked as if they had traveled through 1,000 sleepless nights. Yet on stage, there was still a spark. Something that made audiences feel they were watching a soul who had survived a storm no one else could imagine. Her 1979 album, Broken English, marked a turning point. Gone were the sweet ballads. In their place were songs that ripped away any glamour, laying bare anger, loss, and defiance. Listeners could hear every scar in her voice, and it was that raw honesty that drew them in. But success didn't mean a new life. The years ahead were still filled with illness, addiction, and failed relationships. A friend recalled that even during her most successful tours, Marianne often disappeared right after a performance. No parties, no backstage photos, just quietly leaving, destination unknown. Strange stories followed her. Once, while in New York, she abruptly canceled all interviews, locked her hotel room door, and cut contact with everyone for 3 days. When she returned, she simply said, "I needed quiet." No one knew what had happened in that time. Even with her place in music restored, the shadows never left Marianne. She lived as if always ready to vanish again, without warning, without a trace. And even in her later years, there were moments when she could be found sitting alone by a hotel window, looking down at the busy street, as though searching for something only she could name. Was her return merely an intermission between two disappearances, or had she learned to exist in both worlds, the bright light of the stage and the private darkness no one else could touch? Conclusion: the legacy of Marianne Faithfull. In her 70s, Marianne Faithfull remains a living paradox, a woman who had fallen to the very bottom through addiction, homelessness, and illness, yet still found the strength to stand and sing again. She was an icon of swinging London, yet spent much of her life wandering at the edge of the spotlight. Her music, from As Tears Go By to Broken English, tells more than the story of a singer. It is the diary of a soul once torn apart, painstakingly stitched back together. For her devoted fans, Marianne was never the perfect image of the 1960s. She was proof that true beauty lives in the cracks, the places where the light breaks through. And yet, there was something she never seemed to escape: the feeling of disappearing. Not the disappearance of death, but of slipping quietly out of the world's view, living like a shadow, only to reappear without warning, reminding everyone she was still here. An old friend once said, "For Marianne, the distance between laughing in a Paris cafe and vanishing from every headline is just one night train away." It was a remark both gentle and unsettling, a reminder that we could never be certain where she really was, or what she was thinking. Today, looking back, Marianne Faithfull is not only a singer, an actress, or a fashion icon. She is an unanswered question. A story of someone who could be both brilliant and dark, both resilient and fragile. Perhaps her greatest legacy is not the songs themselves, but that mysterious presence, one that leaves you wondering if, even when sitting right in front of you, Marianne is somewhere else entirely, somewhere only she knows the way to.